All right, listener, you know we love to get into the nitty-gritty of spy stories, and this one,
Hmm.
well, it's a doozy. We're talking Robert Hansen, FBI agent turned double agent for the Soviets. You sent in that American Scandal episode, so let's use that to unpack how someone, seemingly normal, ends up betraying their country.
It really is a puzzle, isn't it? Even now, trying to figure out how someone can live such a completely double life, especially in a high-stakes world like counterintelligence.
I mean, talk about a double life.
Yeah.
And to understand it, I think we got to go back to the beginning. The podcast talks about Hansen's childhood, rough childhood, actually. His dad was a Chicago cop, intelligence division, but their relationship definitely strained. That kind of thing leaves a mark, right?
Absolutely. Early experiences, they shape us. And for Hansen, you wonder if that tough relationship with his dad maybe fueled those feelings of inadequacy that the podcast talks about. Like he always needed approval, wanted to prove himself.
And yet, he ends up following in his father's footsteps, joins law enforcement, starts with the Chicago PD, but then, bam, he's in the FBI. Like he's drawn to that world, even with his dad's disapproval.
You have to wonder if it was his way of trying to get that validation he felt he lacked. You know, maybe joining law enforcement, especially intelligence work, was his way of finally feeling like he measured up. Like if he had access to secrets, to power, then maybe.
But here's the thing. He gets into the FBI, working counterintelligence, no less. Seems like, the perfect spot for a dedicated patriot, right?
Yeah.
But no, that's where the story takes a turn. Hansen felt undervalued, get this, underpaid, sitting at a desk job. I mean, who hasn't felt that way at some point? Am I right, listener?
Sure, but most of us, we don't have access to like top secret intel. For Hansen, that feeling of resentment mixed with all the knowledge he had, it's a dangerous combo. You could say it's almost a textbook case of how someone turns to espionage. They've got a grudge, they're holding secrets, and they feel like they deserve more.
And he doesn't just sit around complaining. In 1979, he walks right into the Soviet import-export business, which, by the way, was a known front for the GRU, Soviet military intelligence, and basically says, hey, I got secrets to sell. And the name he uses, James Smith. James Smith. Talk about unoriginal, right, listener? You'd think a master spy could come up with something a little more spy-worthy.
It's kind of strange, right? You do wonder what his mindset was at that point. Was it just like testing the waters, or was he already all in?
Whatever it was, he took the risk. And his first target, Dmitry Polyev, a GRU agent who was secretly working for the U.S. Hansen exposed him, which, the podcast says, probably led to Polyev's execution. It's chilling when you think about the real-world consequences, even from the very beginning.
And it's even more unsettling because it seems like Hansen exposed Polyev to protect himself. Like he wanted to eliminate a potential threat to his own spying. That takes a certain level of calculation, wouldn't you say?
So, okay, now he's in deep. But why risk it all? Was it all about the money?
Well, I mean, he got paid a lot, huge sums for his espionage. But the podcast mentions this one incident, really fascinating. His wife, Bonnie, she finds a stash of cash in their basement.
Wait, hold up. A stash of cash in the basement. That's like straight out of a movie. What did he tell her? Like you won it playing poker or something?
And not quite. He actually confesses to a priest,
Yeah.
and agrees to donate the money to charity. And he even stops spying for a while. It's wild, right? He's seeking redemption, but the pull of that double life, it's too strong. It really makes you think, listener, what was it about that life that drew him back in?
Maybe the thrill. Living a secret life, feeling like you're smarter than everyone, like you've got this power nobody else knows about. It's got to be addictive, right?
It's a good point. There's
Okay.
definitely a psychological element here. Was it power, danger, or maybe even some twisted sense of control?
So he gets a taste, tries to walk away, but the pull is too strong. And then things escalate big time.
Yeah, 1985 rolls around. He's gotten a promotion, but it actually puts him in more financial strain. And that's when he decides to contact the KGB, the Soviet Union's top intelligence agency.
The KGB, we're talking serious espionage now, listener. He went from like dipping his toes in the water
Yeah.
to diving headfirst into the deep end. Like he wasn't content with just being a small-time player anymore. He wanted to play on the big stage, be the guy. But here's the thing. He wasn't operating in a vacuum. The FBI, they knew they had a mole somewhere in their ranks. Think about that pressure, knowing they're being hunted from within.
And they launched a huge investigation. But Hansen, he was really good at covering his tracks. I mean, the fact that he was able to operate undetected for so long, with the FBI actively looking for him, it shows how crafty he was, how well he knew the system.
Okay, wait, hold on. This is where it gets really interesting. How did he manage to do that? stay under the radar for so long? Were there any close calls? What kind of tactics was he using? Spill the tea?
Well, the podcast goes deep on the FBI's hunt for the mole, and let me tell you, it was a long one. Lots of frustration, dead ends, bureaucracy, even problems with the CIA and FBI, like not working together. It's amazing it took so long to find him.
Seriously. Like something out of a movie, but with, real life stakes.
Yeah.
What was Hansen doing specifically to stay hidden that long? Any close calls, anything like that?
He was super meticulous, really knew his stuff, dead drops, coded messages, even disguises to avoid being followed. He clearly understood counterintelligence inside and out, and he used that knowledge to his advantage.
Master manipulator for sure. But it wasn't just about staying hidden, was it? He was actively giving the Soviets sensitive information, stuff that could really hurt the U.S.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Don't forget, this was the Cold War, like peak Cold War tension. The stuff Hansen was leaking, it could have blown major operations, exposed undercover agents, maybe even tipped the balance of power. One example that really stood out in the podcast, he revealed a secret tunnel the U.S. had built under the Soviet embassy in D.C.
No way. A tunnel. What for?
It was for intercepting Soviet communications. And when Hansen blew its cover, that was a huge loss for U.S. intelligence.
Crazy. So all those years, while everyone thought they were ahead of the game, Hansen's just feeding the Soviets intel right under their noses. Did anyone even suspect him at all?
There were a few times when people, colleagues, raised some concerns, but Hansen was really good at deflecting. He had this image, the devout Catholic, family man. Tough to imagine that guy was a traitor.
So he's playing the long con, using his, normal life as a cover. It's scary, the level of deception.
Yeah.
Two completely separate lives. It's mind-blowing.
It's one of the things about this case that's so hard to wrap your head around. How did he manage those two worlds? Was there any guilt there? Or did he really believe he was doing the right thing? What do you think, listener? Hard to say, right?
Yeah, it's hard to fathom. Makes you question everything you think you know about people. But in the meantime, the FBI is still hunting for this mole. They were getting closer, though, right?
They were making progress, but Hansen, he was always a step ahead. Until, that is, they got this crazy piece of evidence from a former KGB officer, a garbage bag.
Wait, a garbage bag? Seriously? That's what cracked the case.
Yeah, sounds weird, right? But Hansen had used this specific garbage bag to wrap up some documents he was giving to his Soviet handlers. And the FBI, they found his fingerprints on it, matched them to his prints on file. Game over.
Talk about poetic justice. Something he just tossed away, didn't even think about, ends up being his downfall.
It just goes to show even the most careful spy can make mistakes. And for Hansen, that tiny error had huge consequences.
So they got the fingerprints, the proof. Did they just go arrest him then?
Not right away. They wanted to catch him in the act. So they came up with this whole plan, put him in a new job where he'd have access to super sensitive stuff. Then they waited for him to make a move.
That must have been intense, just waiting for him to take the bait. Did it work?
Oh, it worked. 2001, they arrested Hansen red-handed, making a dead drop in a park. It was huge news. I mean, this wasn't just some random agent. This was one of their own. Can you imagine the betrayal they felt?
Yeah, devastating. Like their whole system, the people they thought they knew, all of it was shattered. So after all those years, living this double life, it all comes crashing down. What happened to him then?
Life in prison. No parole. He ended up in solitary confinement at ADX Florence, that supermax prison in Colorado. The one where they send the most dangerous criminals.
Seems fitting, I guess.
Yeah.
A man who lives in the shadows, trading in secrets and lies. He had a family, a career, but it wasn't enough. What do you think drove him to do it, listener? Greed, power, resentment, or something else? It's a question that still gets debated.
Was it ideology? Or was he just an opportunist looking out for himself, even if it meant hurting his country? Hansen's case, it's a warning. It reminds us that even the most secure organizations, they're not immune to betrayal.
And it reminds us that we can't ever be truly complacent when it comes to national security. But even with all the precautions in the world, how can you really stop someone who's determined to betray their country?
That's the million-dollar question. Hansen forced the FBI, the whole intelligence community, to look at their weaknesses. They made security tighter, did better background checks, started focusing more on psychology. They didn't want another Hansen.
It makes you think, doesn't it, listener? Do those changes, all those changes, really make a difference? Can you actually predict who's going to become the next Hansen?
That's the thing intelligence agencies are always wrestling with. How do you assess loyalty? Trustworthiness? Can someone resist temptation? It's not a perfect science,
Speaking of not a perfect science, the podcast said Hansen passed a polygraph test. Well, he was a double agent. I mean, come on, a polygraph test. Makes you wonder if those things are even worth it.
It shows you can't rely on just one thing, one tool. Polygraphs, yeah, they can be helpful, but they're not foolproof. At the end of the day, it comes down to people. You need skilled investigators who can, put the pieces together, see the inconsistencies, and sometimes just trust their gut.
So much for technology solving everything.
Mhm.
But it sounds like Hansen's case, it really shook things up, forced everyone to take a hard look at security, at trust in those
Well,
organizations.
for sure. Hansen's betrayal, it exposed weaknesses in the system. It wasn't just about him, it was about how he was able to do it for so long without anyone catching on.
And all those changes they made, the stricter rules, the background checks, is it enough? Are we any safer from another Hansen today?
Tough question. The truth is, espionage is constantly evolving. New tech, new ways to communicate, and then there's cyber espionage, which is a whole other
And
animal.
also, how do you keep up? What are they doing now, the intelligence agencies, to deal with all these new threats?
It's a constant process of adapting. They're investing in technology, sure, but also in people, training analysts, building relationships with informants, and creating a culture where everyone is vigilant.
It's like a reminder that espionage isn't just something you see in the movies, right?
Right.
It's real, it's happening all the time, and it has huge consequences.
Absolutely. And it's not just about governments anymore either. You have corporations, groups outside the government, even individuals spying for different reasons. It's a messy world out there, and you need a lot of different tools to deal with it.
Well, listener, I think we've all got a lot to chew on after this deep dive into Robert Hansen. Betrayal, trust, what makes a spy tick. It's fascinating stuff, even if it is a little unsettling.
And if you want to go even deeper on this, I definitely say check out the full American Scandal episode. They interview former FBI agents, intelligence experts, even some people whose lives were directly affected by Hansen. It really helps you understand the complexity of this case and what it all means.
I agree. And as we wrap up here, it makes you wonder, listener, what other secrets are out there? What other stories of betrayal, intrigue, and espionage are waiting to be discovered?
That's the thing about intelligence. It's all about secrecy, operating in the shadows. And while we might never know the whole truth, that's part of what makes it so captivating, that drive to understand, to uncover the mysteries.
Well said. Until next time, listener, happy listening, and maybe keep a decoder ring handy, just in case.